I'm here in Adelaide to look at Indigenous leadership. Now, Australia is well served in that regard. There are well-known leaders like Pat Dodson, Noel Pearson, Marcia Langton, the Federal Minister, Ken Wyatt. But there's a new generation of leadership emerging, and one of them is Sally Scales. Now, Sally is just 30, and she's chair of APY Lands, the executive board. She's formidable, she's feisty, and as you'll see, she's a lot of fun. Sally Scales, welcome to 1+1. Before we start to drill down on the issues, I want to talk about APY Lands. It's a very remote part of Australia.
Yes.
It's where the Northern Territory border intersects with the South Australian border.
And the WA border. So the APY Lands is nestled into the top right-hand corner of South Australia, so it's quite remote in that sort of land mass size. So we're really sort of bordering on the three states, so the Northern Territory, South Australia, WA.
And it's not only remote, it's big.
It's big. Bigger than land mass, bigger than Belgium.
And it's also sparsely populated. What's the population?
It's sort of, on last reports, is around 3,000 to 4,000 people. So there's communities that have 500 people, there's smaller communities that have maybe 150, so yeah.
Now, you grew up there. Just tell me what that was like, just growing up in such a remote part of Australia.
Well, my community is also the furthest west. So Barrie Cassidy is half an hour from the three-way border. So, you know, I'm from the wild, wild west, as I say. And, I mean, I'm quite privileged and I'm quite thankful for the upbringing that I had. I had a non-Indigenous father who was very much immersed into the culture and brought me and my siblings up having this great understanding of we are children of both worlds, you know, and we have a privilege in that space to walk in both and learn in both, and having an incredibly phenomenal mother as well who just did her own thing and who was, for me, for my formative years, she was the chairperson for NPY Women's Council, so I got to see incredible women leading from such an early age. So I'm really privileged and I'm thankful for the mentorship and the space that I got to be in growing up.
So they're the people who most influenced you growing up, with the strong women around you?
Strong women, but also like you've got like strong women, strong elders around me. So growing up knowing leaders who fought for land rights, who fought for, fought for having a disability and an aged care service on remote communities. So that was Mrs. Nora Ward, who was campaigned for that. But also when there was a petrol sniffing epidemic, which is, you know, young people were, sniffing petrol, which causes, brain damages, all sorts of problems. Our community stood up and said, you can't lock them up. They're actually quite sick, and really worked with healthcare services and worked with the government. And so we've got non-sniffable fuels in our remote communities to limit that exposure.
Was that hard to approach it that way, to persuade other people to approach it that way?
Well, they weren't going to give up. The leaders stood up and said, enough is enough, you need to hear us, you need to listen to what we're doing. And they weren't going to give up. I mean, my elders have never given up. Like the space that we're in, it's here because they pushed for it.
Now, when you were quite young, I think even before you were a teenager, you were almost ordained as a leader. People around you just figured out you would lead one day. Yeah. Well, I mean, when you're told at 12, Aboriginal people already have a foot in the grave, what are you going to do to get yourself and your community out of that space, is pretty heavy to hear at 12. And that is a lot of pressure. But why you, do you think? Why were you sort of chosen at that time?
I I don't know. I think it was just, I mean, I was the combination of both my parents and the combination of my elders. You know, being like, I love my siblings, I do, they're incredible, but I was always more with the attitude and the confidence.
Yeah, they would have recognised something in you, right? That you were more outgoing, perhaps. More...
Oh, yeah. I think I've had confidence out of the woozah forever, so it was just sort of, yeah, natural that, man, but for me, like, growing up and seeing women lead from an earlier experience, when Mum was that chairperson of Women's Council, so seeing all of these ladies who just led and who got things done, you know, and worked and worked and worked. And that was my early exposure. So I had that goal of, well, they can do it, why can't I? So it was, I think it was always a natural sort of thing, like, yeah, they've got it, I can do it too.
Yeah, people say about that you're a very positive person.
Yeah.
Disciplined?
Oh, I think there's sometimes.
They also say you're driven.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, though, is that you're feisty. Now, you talked about your mum, and she was sassy.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very much my mum's child and my dad's child. Like, I'm all of those things. I do come in a cute little package of all of those things. I mean, for me, I have to be driven. I'm my eldest voice. I mean, I'm their child. So, you know, it gets to a point where, you know, I'm representing them in certain situations, and if I need to get my point across, I will get it across. But you have to, at this time now, it's not just males leading, or it's not just an age bracket leading to be an elder or be a leader. It's actually saying, I'm here for a reason and you're going to hear me. And so I'm driven in that element for sure. And I mean, for me, with being positive and being a happy person, like, there's so much negative stories about Aboriginal people out there all this time. So I always want to bring up a positive sort of face to it all and have that. And I think, you know, you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. So it's also being really nice and making sure that what people are hearing are actually hearing it, instead of, oh, that's just another angry black woman, I'm not going to hear that story.
And you talked about how it was male-dominated, and it was until fairly recently. It was only 2017 that the South Australian government legislated and put in mandatory gender splits, and that affected the council, like yours, and right away. And I just wonder how that played out, because suddenly not only a woman emerges as the leader, but a young person.
Yeah.
How did that go down?
I mean, to be elected by the other executive members to be deputy chair was pretty incredible. Like, it was really a great, you know, they saw that I was that I was their child, or that I was in that space, you know, for them to consider that I was the best person for that was pretty amazing. And then when we had the vote, when the previous chair stood down, Frank Young, the board voted me in. It was quite shocking, and it was like, oh, okay. But I don't know, sometimes it's, don't want to be too ego, like it's the natural progression, but it's also like, I think for everyone it was like, well, she's got the combination of both. You know, you're sitting in a board that is about governance, it's about leadership, it's also like rooted in culture, it's rooted in knowledge, it's, you know, Anangu, it's, so, and I'm both of those.
But you felt, I can do this.
Yeah.
Right?
So it was that sort of, yeah, I can do this, and I had the support of, like, to have the support of the women on that board, and not, you know, not just the women, but to have those other women on the board was really amazing. And I think that's where there is that cohort of togetherness as well.
Was there any resentment in the wider community?
Of course, you know, there's, you know, there was meetings where there was, you know, you just need to be quiet little girl, or that little girl thinks she knows what she's...
So was it because you were a woman or because you were young? If there was an impediment with some of these people in their minds, what was it?
I think it was a combination of both. It was because I was a woman and speaking up, but how dare it was a young woman who was doing this. Yeah. You know, that whole respect your leader, elders and all that sort of stuff. I was like, in a board setting or in a meeting setting, it's a very non-Indigenous space that you're looking at. You're coming from that space. Everyone's got a seat at that table. Everyone's having a conversation. There is no... And there's been times when men have tried to pull the cultural element on it to quieten the women down. And I've actually had to step back and say, hang on, you can't do that in this space, because you're making the women leave the room, which actually diminishes the quorum anyway, so you're not going to get the job done.
Give us a sense of a typical day in your life, if there's such a thing.
A typical day, coffee is first, and then so I've got kinship care over my nephew, Walter, so I've had him for a couple of years. And then I also look after my mum, so it's all of that sort of stuff. But it would be what's going on. So whether it's just talking to the art centres and the collective about programmings or things that we're trying to do in our galleries or things like that. It would also be communicating with the general manager of APY as well as the director to find out and getting ready for board meetings if that's coming up. And also emailing and having a chat to either Pat Anderson or Megan Davis around the Uluru Statement components. So
you mentioned that you're foster mum to your youngest brother's child.
Yeah.
That can't be easy in the circumstances. You've got to do a lot of travel.
Yeah. Oh, Walter comes with me. He's my entourage.
How old is Walter?
He's 4. 2017 was an interesting year for me. So APY happened that year. The Uluru Statement happened that year. So going to the Ross River Dialogues. And then that December, I got Walter. And I actually made the conscious decision for myself and for Walter that I wasn't going to let being a parent stop what I needed to do with my work and with my leadership positions.
Did you think, though, at some point, look, I'm going to step up here and take responsibility, but it could be a bit of a handbrake on my career?
No, because I didn't want that to happen, because I didn't want to resent him at a later stage. So for me, I was like, I will take this kid on, but this is our life and this is what it looks like. Mm. For me, I want to be the best mother I can be for this child, and that means being my best self, and my best self is doing all the things that I love, and I'm not going to slow that down and I'm not going to stop that. Mm. And I think as women, we're expected to pick and choose whether we want a career or whether we want motherhood. And it's about, well, what do we want? I actually think it's like, what do we want as a woman and how do we make that work? And getting a support network around you.
And you're making it work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a kid who's had the experience and the exposure of, like I did, seeing leaders in all sorts of spaces, whether it's being out bush and seeing, you know, in the art centre space, you know, his 97-year-old great-grandmother painting, or it's in leadership meetings with the Uluru Statement and he's seeing all these phenomenal leaders like Pat Turner, like he'd go, or Anderson, or, you know, Nolan Hunter, or it's all he's getting this experience of leadership from a young age, as well as saying, you know, I'm really quite comfortable in blending into all, and he loves all sorts of spaces, and he thinks he's the king of the world, really.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to say one day that he was there when history was being made. But let's talk about that as to whether history is being made or whether it's just being frustrated. And that is the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Now, you've been very active in that. As you said, it started at the Ross River Dialogue, the Adelaide Dialogue. It must have been exciting 3 years ago, a real sense of hope.
Definitely. Like it was, and that, what people don't know, or maybe they don't realise about the Uluru Convention was quite unique from my point of view. Was this was the first time Aboriginal people were together, and it wasn't a march, it wasn't a celebration, it wasn't hearing the national sorry, it wasn't anything like that. It was the first time we're actually getting together to have an in-depth conversation about what we wanted around constitutional reform. So whether it was treaty, some communities, dialogues, the treaty was the most important thing. For some, it was we've got our culture, we've got our language and all this sort of stuff. We actually want Australia to see us and hear us, but there was always an underlying current of we want Australia to see us, know who we are, so there was a huge component of that, saying, don't they just want to know us? So the statement was the greatest thing of hope, here we're giving it to Australia, and purposely given to Australians, not the government.
Yeah, and you were asked to deliver consensus, and you delivered consensus.
Yeah.
What happened? 3 years ago.
But I mean, we can, but isn't this politics at the moment? There is no, if you're a moderate or if you lean one way or another, there is, will the real politicians please stand up? When are people going to take a stand for something that is right? Not necessarily just to get at the other party. And I think that's where it is. It's a lot of tiptoeing between the two instead of actually doing policies for the betterment of communities.
So it's more the politics that got on the way, is it? Because sometimes in these things, we saw it with the Republic, that the strength of the argument sort of loses out to the process.
Yeah.
And somehow the process kills progress.
Yeah. I mean, Megan Davis and I've been working with her for the past 3 years, and the things that we always look at, the law's not the problem in the Uluru Statement and what we're looking for in the voice to power and all of that sort of stuff. It's politics. And all it is that we want a chance to actually lead our communities. We want a chance to have a conversation and to say what will and won't work in our programmings. Where so much funding, or everyone talks about, Aboriginal communities get this much funding and this much things. It's when it was all pulled into one sort of general, Indigenous Australians funds, I suppose, and then it was, Aboriginal Affairs was divided up into XYZ. They got rid of community-led programmings, from night patrols, from, the way health services used to be and all of that sort of stuff. So it took away history and knowledge and process and procedures that were set in place, put it in, and then everyone had a pool in this Aboriginal Affairs money. Why can't we be at that table to have a discussion what's best for our communities?
How much of all of this do you want included in the Constitution? I guess at its rawest sense, it's recognition in the Constitution, but do you want it to also address injustices and maybe the way forward to address those injustices?
I mean that's where the truth component comes into it. So we need the voice to power so we can have a seat at the table to have discussions around, to be there to say, that program's not going to work on the APY lands. You can't have a nationwide just footprint, there we go, slam dunk. And walk away from it. You actually have to target it and work with those communities to get to those spaces. Then you have that component of treaty, which is having those discussions about past wrongs. And then working through what that treaty process will look like, whether it's a state by state, whether it's, tribal by tribal areas, or whether it's just a nation one. When it comes to the truth component, talking about the history of Australia, talking about the histories of what's happened to Aboriginal people, whether it's massacres or, nuclear bomb, the fact that Maralinga happened.
Yeah.
But also there's stories of trading routes, and there's stories of with Indonesia or, the Papua New Guineans, up in the top end sort of stuff. So there's all sorts of stories there. So wouldn't Australians want to learn about all of that as well?
All right, but one of your big passions is art, of course, Aboriginal art, and the promotion of it, the protection of it. You have 2 galleries?
Yeah, so 2 years ago we opened our Sydney gallery, so the APY Arts Centre Collective, which oversees the 7 art centres on the APY Lands. Last year we opened the Adelaide Gallery, which we're currently in, and that was a long time coming because we've got a studio space as well, which caters to Aboriginal people like Anangu who've had to move down for health reasons or other circumstances, so they've got a space that's just totally theirs. It's great art, you know, art speaks to, whether it speaks to you, you know, whether you like a Ben Quilty piece or an Abdullah Dalla piece or a Ray Ken or a, you know, Warrior Bert and My Grandma. So it's sort of like all of those sorts of things. It's a great art piece will speak to an artist, you know, it is what it is. But for us, what we find is that these artists make incredible works because they know what they're painting. It's Jukurba. I hate this conversation around dream time or dreaming, because it's an insignificant word for what Jukurba is for us. Jukurba is our law, it's our connection to country, it's what our culture is. And, you know, I always talk about how, well, my Jukurba is my land, it's the song lines that are part of it, but it's also me and my connection to it. So for these artists, when they're painting their Jukurba, they're painting their law, and they're painting what they know of it.
So how important is all of this to the APY Lands? Is it commercially successful?
Yeah, for sure. But it's also the art centres are one of the very, if not one of the only places where people have full autonomy over their workplaces. You know, the artists have full control over their finances. It's their job, it's real job, it's, you know, otherwise you're just on, you know, CDP payments and you're doing your activities. This is actually work. You know, people are coming in and they're learning. Because of our galleries as well, we're having young artists who are coming in and having an experience from an early age. The reason our galleries existed is because my elders wanted a young and emerging artist to have a long and successful career. So we're working with art schools to say, you know, having a go at different styles, but also the artists are having a greater experience and exposure to what else is out there. So whether it's not just pigeonholing ourselves as Aboriginal artists, but it's also going, well, we're contemporary artists as well. So it's really, we're going for it. I mean, if it was up to my elders, we would literally have like a gallery in every capital city in 5 years, and I don't think we could do it.
Yeah. How big a problem, though, is exploitation?
I mean, the carpet bagger situation, which is rife in Central Australia, and it's, you know, and it really targets our communities a lot. I call them modern-day slavery owners, because what they'll do is, and you know, with the APY Arts Centre Collective, we've been really quite open and frank and having these discussions and pushing for it, because what they're doing is they're keeping our artists in sheds, really, in Alice Springs, giving them alcohol, drugs, money for gambling addictions, and indebting that artist or a family member and forcing them to work off a debt.
Mm-hmm. So, as customers, what sort of questions should we be asking?
Check if that artist has an art centre in that community. Ask the questions. Find out where it was bought, what the provenance is, what's the sort of how it's come to be. Because there's all sorts of things. Well, the Indigenous Art Code of Conduct says this, or this person says this, or it's actually going, no. Like, we can tell you where this artist works. We can tell you what that art centre looks like. We can tell you the model that they sits in, how much income that artist will get back. Because if you're an Aboriginal artist, you are the biggest earner of income. Because you are, and then you're not just, and it's not a, we don't have a nuclear family of 2.2 and a dog. It's, you're looking at a household of, 8 people if you're lucky, and you're going and supporting other extended family members. So there is that expectation that you'll support family. So when money is taken off that, it's the kid and it's the elderly person that misses out.
You're leaving your position as chair.
Yes.
Later on in the year. Why are you doing that?
Well, I mean, I'm down in Adelaide now, and I think for me, having made that choice for work and for Walter's education, it's not right that I sit on the board and be down here. But it's also, I think I've really enjoyed this experience that I've had, and I encourage more people to step up, and I think it will be another chance for someone else to come through as well.
5 years from now, where do you think Sally Scales will be? What will you be doing?
Well, if I could dream, I want the Ulleris, I want the Voice to Power to be up. I want those conversations, so we're going through it, and in that position somewhere in there, because I think that's been incredible to be a part of, and I suppose the grooming element of my leadership will end up in that space somewhere.
Yeah. Politics?
Well, I think maybe, possibly. I mean, I'll only be 35, so that's still quite young, I suppose, in politics.
Oh, yeah.
Look, for me, I go where the flow goes, and I think it's just working with my communities and seeing what that looks like. I mean, I also, in 5 years, I want the Indigenous Art Code of Conduct to be stronger than it is at the moment. I want us to have a stand against the carpetbaggers. I want consumers to make it, you're parting with your hard-earned money, ask those questions. Make sure you actually buy from an art centre, especially with everyone on, self-isolating. You can look up an art centre. There's a lot more of them on social media. There's a lot more on their websites. So have a conversation and look and do your research, because you're parting with your money, and make sure your money is hitting the ground, not someone's wallet in a big city.
Well, Sally Scales, thank you for joining 1+1. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barrie. Thanks for thinking of me.